Welcome to the Novel Idea Society.
Very,
Uh,
very happy to be seeing you and hearing you.
yes, my apologies for the technical difficulties. We are here to talk about your book, Good Indian Girl. Um, before we talk about the book, I want to talk about your backstory because, my goodness, you have an interesting backstory.
Okay.
Um, this is your third book, correct?
Yes.
But this is your second career.
Yes.
Tell me about your first career and your decision to walk away from that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was an entertainment lawyer for almost 20 years, working in Hollywood. And I had always dreamed of being a writer, but had a very, immigrant growing up experience between Canada and North America. I was born in Canada. And then I I knew the path of creative was not terribly stable and I now have that confirmed 3 books in. And so the only other thing I had ever wanted to be when I was a kid was a lawyer. And so yeah, so I went into that, and I had a very, very long standing career as an attorney, and I enjoyed it, but I just always had this burning passion in the back of my mind that I wanted to tell stories. So I was such an avid reader, and I didn't see, my family in any of the books that I was reading, and so I started writing the books that I wished were on the shelves when I was younger. And it actually took me, I didn't plan to be a lawyer for quite this long. It actually just took me a very long time to get a book deal. So I wrote my first book. I started writing it in 2009, and it didn't get published until January 1st, 2022. So I had like a good decade plus that I was working on it. And then it finally came out, and I was very fortunate that it reached a good audience. And then my second one was kind of poised to do the same. And so I said to myself, it's now or never. If you are ever going to bet on yourself, now is the time. And so in 2022, I left my full-time lawyer job, and I've been writing and traveling full-time, as you've seen in A Good Indian Girl, and you'll see my other books. Travel's a big component in what the characters are doing. And so I got to have that lived experience.
So, A Good Indian Girl, when you talk about lived experience, how much of this story for Jyoti, how much of her story is your story?
Very little of her story is mine. So I have never been married, and I don't have children. And I have always been sort of happily child free. But I knew a lot of people. I'm in my I guess now we would call it mid 40s. And so I have a lot of friends, particularly having done the lawyer path. There's a lot of women who sort of delay having a family and things like that. So I have a ton of people in my circle who have gone through fertility issues and things like that. And I've kind of been that friend that helps other people through it. And I would just thinking about how little that is really dealt with in fiction, but there's just an overwhelming number of women who experience something like that. It's just not really talked about. Um, and so that was kind of a big part of it. And I think the other thing is I would characterize Jyoti as a people pleaser. I think that's a big part of her arc. And I don't think I'm that way. So I think that was a little bit of a sort of creative stretch for me to write that type of character. But I think a lot of people are that way. The parts that are very real to me are the cooking. I am an avid, avid cook. I developed all of those recipes that she does in the book. I wrote them before I actually tried to cook them. And then when my publisher asked me to include recipes in the back, I said, gee, I hope these work, because I already wrote them into the story. Um, but yeah, and the time in Florence and all of the restaurants in the book that are mentioned are real restaurants that I've painstakingly eaten at several times just to make sure
Oh,
those
that's
dishes were
terrible. That must have
as
been so hard
described.
for you.
Very hard. Yeah, it's a great hardship.
Um, how has your writing process evolved from book one that took you a really long time
Yeah.
to go through to this one? your third one? How has your process evolved?
It has evolved so much because I think as lawyers we write a lot. And so I think and there are a lot of lawyers turned authors, quite a few. And so I think that we believe we can just do it. And so I took classes and all of that before I wrote my first novel, but I think I wanted some separation of the lawyer life was very like regimented, that I wanted the creative process to be very free flowing. And so I tried that with my first book. I tried to be, you know, like a pantser, and the characters would tell me what they're going to do and all of that. And that book was in revision for many, many years. So I don't do that anymore. It was silly to think that a lawyer was ever going to be a pantser. A lawyer's clearly going to be a plotter. And so with A Good Indian Girl in particular, I felt like I finally got it. Like I got an efficient process down. I now outline every scene before I start writing. I don't do any of this, like the characters are going to tell me as I'm writing. And obviously things change as you are writing, but I went into that book knowing exactly what was going to happen, exactly what each character's motivation was. And it made the process honestly so much smoother and more fun, because you don't have to rewrite every single thing.
Does it make it go quicker for you then too? Is it like, okay, I
Yeah.
know that I want this story to go this way, plot it all out, bang it all out, and just makes, because I know you have another book coming out right away, and that's a
Yes.
pretty quick turnaround time.
Yeah, so I've been on a book a year since I got my first publishing deal. And so as long as they let me keep doing that, I will do that. But yes, it definitely I had to become more efficient if I wanted to keep a book a year. I can't like sit here in a decade of revision and hope it's going to work out at the end of that. And so so yeah, it's definitely made the process far more efficient, and it honestly is more fun this way. Like before I was sort of floundering. It's not my personality. There are very good pantsers out there that write best-selling books, have written dozen, 20, whatever it is, but it's just a different personality and just not mine.
So, you talked about how you have been the friend in this situation, but you have a lot of really strong characters in this book. Um, who do you identify the most with?
Oh, that's an interesting question. No one has asked me that. I love Karishma's spunk and her journey. I don't think I'm that. So I'm somewhere between Jyoti and Karishma. Like I'm not the people pleaser, but I'm not the like absolute like out there alternative life person either. I think I fall somewhere in the middle between those two. But yeah, that's a really interesting question. But yeah, I
I
think
just
I'm
know
more
authors
middle of the
have their
road.
babies. Like they have
Yeah.
their book is their baby, but then they have those certain characters that they're a little more attached to, whether they're more like them or they just have they're a little more protective of those characters.
Yeah, I feel I love Karishma. And you know, it's between Jyoti and Karishma. I love them both. I thought about doing a dual POV initially, but then it just really felt like this was Jyoti's story. But the character that I always said, okay, if I'm ever gonna write a book that relates to this one, it's obviously gonna be Karishma's story. And it's gonna be a prequel. It's gonna be during her publishing time in New York. I always knew if I was ever going to write something that related to this book, it was going to be that.
So is that what you're doing for your next book?
No, it is completely unrelated. Um, so yeah, the next one. So I've kept up this. I don't know how long I'll be able to do it for. Each of my novels has taken place in a different country so far, and so for the next one, we are heading over to Singapore. So very different backdrop.
Very bougie.
Yeah, well, it's actually not. That's kind of the point of the book is
Oh,
to
okay.
challenge stereotypes and expectations of what North America has about Singapore.
Well, Crazy Rich Asians did not help that.
No, it did not help that. And as a lawyer, I actually worked at Warner Brothers, which produced Crazy Rich Asians. So very familiar with it. But yes, Crazy Rich Asians definitely formed quite a few stereotypes about the country. So I'm actually writing about an orphan from Singapore who finds her way over to North America.
Okay, interesting. So did you go to Singapore for research, or how did you, because I mean, obviously
Yeah.
writing about each country, you have to, I mean, the restaurants you said in this place are all real places.
Yeah.
Um, so is this kind of how you get to also see the countries you want to see?
Yes. So I tried to, so yes, I spent a lot of time on the ground in Singapore, as I did in Italy. But I try to go, so I'm fortunate, I've traveled a lot, in my former life. And so I sort of have ideas of like what country makes sense for a particular topic. Like Italy and food was, just a match made in heaven. Like there's, that had to be the place that I did a culinary inspired book. And then for Singapore, I've been a few times, and I have relatives who live in Singapore who have grown up there. And friends. And so I have spent a lot of time there. There is a little bit of a nod to Crazy Rich Asians in that novel. It actually takes place. There's a very iconic scene from Crazy Rich Asians, which is the historical place that inspired my book.
It's interesting. Um, I know that you said that you write the books that you wish you had when you were growing up.
Yeah.
These are not necessarily YA books. They're not
No.
necessarily intended
No.
for kids, but I've noticed that there has been a big increase, and it was interesting looking at the publishing story and bringing how she really wanted to bring that character out. And I've noticed that there has been more of an influx of Indian and Asian writers over the last, I don't want to say since Crazy Rich Asians, but I've noticed that there's a lot more Indian, Muslim,
Yeah.
particularly female authors that
Yeah.
are being more representative and sharing what those stories are like. I've read so many of them. They're often very funny. I don't know if that's, and I don't know because it's not my culture. I don't know if that's part of the
Yeah.
culture or if these are
Yeah.
just very funny women that happen to write really great books.
Right.
Um, but yours are very specific to an say, is it Gujarati? Is that correct?
Gujarati. Yeah.
Is that
Gujarati.
very specific to your experience and
Yes.
very specific group of people?
Yes, for sure. So I liken the different parts of India to the different countries in Europe. Like they have different languages, different food, different
Right.
clothing. And so for me, it was so I was 41 years old the very first time I read a novel that I did not write about a Gujarati family. And it was just such a wild experience. Like I remember everything about that experience and going through it. It was just a few years ago and thinking to myself, wow, what must it have been like if I had grown up seeing this type of thing? Like there's so much, like I think when you grow up in an immigrant community, and I grew up in mostly white spaces after leaving Toronto. And so there's so many things where I thought, because I didn't know that author, and I thought, oh, the mannerisms and stuff that she's describing, that might just be Gujarati stuff and not my parents being weird as I thought it was for all the decades leading up to this. When you sort of see those commonalities and things that like I've just really never had the opportunity to experience, because for the most part, the only Indians I knew growing up were my family members. And
Mhm.
so, I didn't really see anything
Is
outside
that
of
my
that.
quirky family or is that my community?
Right, exactly. And I honestly didn't know the answers. And then now I'm starting to read, like, I agree with you. I feel like in the last like 5 years or so, I'm seeing a lot more of these, sort of diverse authors, that are starting to get published and telling their story. And I think for a long time, the publishing industry, um, would say, oh, they're Indian, they're sort of all the same, but it's like, like Jhumpa Lahiri, who's fantastic and is the first Indian author I ever read. She's Bengali. I've never met a Bengali person in my life. Like, I really don't know anything about that culture. Like, it's great to have something, but it really, like, reading a book by a Gujarati author was so different than reading a story by an Indian author who's from a different part of India. And so even within the, like, India obviously has a caste system that's, been in place since
Mhm.
British rule essentially.
Forever.
But forever, and then heightened during British colonization. And so even my characters, like, the reason I make all the families, like, all of their surnames are Shah, because that in and of itself, like, that's what I know, because that's what I grew up as. Like, if I did Patel or Desai or Mehta or like the other common Gujarati names, I don't really know their customs the way I do Shah's.
It's like a
And
clan.
so yeah, because it all, like, goes together. And so for me, I sort of realized I don't want to step on the toes of these other authors that are coming up that come from those backgrounds, just to, like, slap a different name on the family so people don't think it's me. And so I kind of got comfortable. Like, in my first book, I used Desai because I sort of went through, oh, I don't want people to think it's me. But since then, I'm naming everyone Shahs because that's really the sect of India that I'm familiar with and can write authentically about. And I'm glad that there's so many other authors coming up now that are Patels, Desais, whatever it is, and they can write about those, sort of minor castes in a way that I could not.
Do you hear from people that have read your book that are, whether they're from the same sect or not, and just so happy to see themselves in books?
I do. I've been, like, one of the best things about this second career has honestly just been hearing from readers, and just hearing, like, my first book is being taught in high schools to, like, see, which no one sets out to write thinking
No,
that's going to
no.
happen. And I've had the opportunity to, do Zoom like this with those classes, and, to hear 17 and 18-year-olds talking, about the stories and kind of being exposed to different things at an earlier age has been really cool. But yeah, it's so rewarding when you get one of those messages from someone who says, this is the first time I saw, you know, whether it's just like a dumb thing, like a dumb custom in there, or the words. That's a lot of it, is, just seeing the foods and the words that people have just never seen in a book before, that they grew up eating. And so food definitely plays a big role, I think, in all of my books, just because it's the part of the culture that immigrants can take with them when they leave. Like, it's the part that is home.
Mhm. I to my fiance, we had many conversations about this book because it made me crave Indian food, not Italian food, Indian food
Okay.
so bad through the entirety of the book. I would have probably had it. I mean, it only took me a couple days to read, but truly, I, it's all I wanted the entire time. Have you heard that from people too?
Yeah, I feel like I feel like the recurring theme in the blurbs and in the reviews is this book will make you hungry. And I'm glad that it is for Indian food, which is great. And I really enjoyed, like, just coming up with those fusion recipes and things like that. But yeah, I think every single blurb I got for this book mentioned the food.
Did you intend the food to be a character?
I knew it would be, just by virtue of what I was writing. I don't think I expected it to, like, I almost feel like the food is the star. Like Jyoti's there and Karishma's there and her mom is there, but it almost feels like the food became the star. And so, I mean, I'm good with it. I don't
Well,
think that's what I planned.
I don't think it's the star though. I think the relationship she has with her mom,
Yeah.
I think, is something that is so relatable, whether you
Yes.
have immigrant parents or not. The assumptions we make about what our parents think
Yeah.
and what we do, but also the fact that her mom straight up flipped the script on her. I
Yeah.
think that that's the funniest thing about as your parents get older. that they
Yeah.
still have the ability to surprise you, and you think that
Right.
you think you know them, and you think you know what they're thinking, and you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that relationship. And it's interesting because I feel like my family is very stereotypical Asian in the sense of my parents are not big oversharers. Like I think we have shared more than most Indian families, like cousins and things like other family members or family friends that grew up in places that had a bigger Indian community than my particular family had. They seem to be a little more hands off, but I think because it was always just the four of us, we have like a more open relationship, but it's like my parents are not the type to be like, oh, when I was your age, I did this or whatever. And so part of writing for me has been to try to learn their stories. And it's been really like it's a challenge. And I'm trained as a litigator, like I'm practically taking their depositions to try to learn what's going
Tell me
on.
more. I need
And
more.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And so I think that's the type of thing, like I would love to know even more about my parents' backgrounds and things like that. But I think at this point, I'm also coming to like, we're just different. We were raised in two very different cultures. My parents were raised in India. And so me being of a Western mindset of like wanting to do all the introspection and, like go inward. And I was also a psychology major before I became
The
a lawyer.
feelings, the
Yeah,
feeling.
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I'm very into that. Like, let's all look inward. Let's like unpack this. And that's not really their personality. And so I think I'm making peace with the fact that I will just never probably know their full stories. Like I get little snippets here and there, but that's one of the things I loved about writing that because I got several messages which just really warmed my heart from other Indians or people in the Asian community that said they used the book, they read it, and their mom read it, and they used the book to actually open up a dialogue, like the type that I'm still trying to do. But they were able to open up that dialogue, and that is so, I mean, so rewarding. Like that, because I think so many of us feel that way. Like we want to know our parents' stories, but we also don't want to pressure or burden them knowing all they've already gone through.
Has your mom read the book?
Yes, my mom has read all of my books. My
And
mom
what
has
does
read all of
she
my
think?
books, and my brother has.
What does she
Pardon?
think? What does she think?
Oh, she has enjoyed all of them. We haven't had like super in-depth talks about it, going going back to the fact that she's not they're not big readers anyways. So my three books are the only books my mom has read in decades. Um,
So how did you become like raised by immigrant parents who don't
yeah,
really read a lot,
yeah,
who don't tell stories a lot?
yeah.
How did you become a writer?
So I'm trying to dissect this myself. I have asked my dad to put together a family tree because it didn't come from the two of them. But both yeah, my dad has not read a book in my entire lifetime. I think he said he was 13 the last time he read a book in school or something like that. So yeah, the love of reading and the love of writing has skipped at least one generation. And so my grandparents on both sides passed when I was relatively young. And so I've been trying to figure out where that came from. My brother is also an avid reader, and I think the reading part I can kind of understand. The reading part I think just came from we were such avid library people. And I think that's the case for a ton of immigrants because it's a resource that's available, that's free when you're, kind of struggling for money. But I cannot picture my childhood without the library. Like we would get our maximum of 10 books. And after 5 days, they would have to drive me back because I would read two a day during the summer. And so I had very supportive parents in terms of we will drive you back and forth to the library. We're not going to get any books for ourselves, but we will take you and your brother there. And so that love of reading was always fostered, even though it wasn't like modeled in the house.
That's amazing. I was the same way with libraries. And so every now and then when I go shopping with my mom now, if we're at a bookstore, she'll always look at me and say, "It's not a library." It's
Right.
a stack, a stack
Right.
of books. The Canadian writing community, particularly among women, is pretty incredible. Is
Yeah.
that something that you have found yourself a part of? I know you grew up in Toronto. That's kind of the mecca of writing in Canada. I know you're based out of LA now, but have you found yourselves into that Canadian writers hub?
Yeah, I'm starting to, well, and I think in particular, like there are definitely more Indian writers, but not so many that it's like an overwhelming number. And so I think as we kind of move through, um, we're all starting to meet each other, and sort of have these other groups. I think there's a lot more Indian romance writers than people that are writing, just sort of in the upmarket fiction
There are
space.
a
Like
lot of Indian romance
there are
writers.
a lot of Indian romance writers, a lot, a lot, a lot. But I think there's starting to be more people like me who are kind of delving into those other relationships, in women's lives, siblings, parents, children, colleagues, friends, like that's the space that I like to write in, because I feel like there's enough romance stuff out there. Like if you're looking for that book, there's plenty on the shelves, but there's not quite as many about these other family dynamics and friend dynamics. And like women have a lot going on beyond who their romantic partner is.
I actually really liked that relationships that she had with the other divorcee, whose name's escaping my mind right now, but how it wasn't, I wondered if you were going to make them like romantic partners because I felt like that was, because that's what would happen
In most
in like
books.
an Eat, Pray, Love rom,
Yeah.
but women just have friends, like supportive,
Yeah.
who can
Yeah.
just do supportive things for them. And I thought that was so different because I really thought that that was going to go differently.
Yes. And I think I feel like in all of my books, I have seen there's always like some male figure that, I mean, I will give you the spoiler of all of my books. None of my books send the message that in order to be fulfilled, a woman has to find a man. None of my books are gonna have that as its like ultimate messaging. Obviously, that's a part of a woman's life, and she'll have those relationships or whatever. But my stories are generally about women finding themselves and like unto themselves, not like depending on somebody else for that. And so yeah, I like doing that, but it's so interesting to me, like going back to the high school students I had mentioned for my first book. It's like very interesting to hear some of their comments, because you realize how early in life we are ingrained to think that's the most important thing. So that book has, the someone who could potentially be a love interest. And as you go through the book, you kind of see how that unfolds. And the number of comments that I've gotten from the high school seniors that are, oh, we wish that
We were
that
cheering
was
for
the
him.
ending. Like it's that, like, that's been interesting for me, that like by that age, we are conditioned to believe like that's what a story should be and that's how it should end.
You need your Prince Charming ending. I mean, she didn't
Yes.
go all the way there to come home without a man.
Right. Right. Right.
So I won't keep you too much longer. But I'm curious, what do you read for fun?
I read a lot. I basically read in the same space that I like to write in. So I don't read a ton of romance. Um, I probably don't read any romance if I'm being honest. Um, but um, but I'm actually just pulling up. Like I just read City of Nightbirds, which I thought was, it's like ballet in Russia. I thought that was like fascinating. But yeah, I like the type of book that makes you think, which is hopefully what I'm writing. Like you want to be entertained, but you also maybe want to like, like it's not what I call like the reality TV of literature. Like I like something with substance in books. I think because I worked in Hollywood for such a long time, like I use TV for everything mindless. Like that's where I want my mindless stuff. But when I'm reading, I just really want something that like is going to get me thinking or get me emotionally, like just something that has like a little bit of heft. But yeah, I'm trying to read as many different diverse authors as I can and just learn. I just feel like I learn so much. Like I feel like there's been a wave of Nigerian authors between the UK and North America. And I have never been to Nigeria. Although reading all these books makes me want to go. And so I just love learning about other cultures, and I think books are such a good way to do that. So I try to learn as much as I can when I'm reading and
I'm
still
always
being
curious,
entertained.
how people got their book deal.
Pardon?
How did you get your book deal?
My first one or this one?
Okay. Is there a journey of book deals?
There's a journey of book deals. So I had my very first book deal I got in 2020.
Hmm.
And it was such a tumultuous time. It was pandemic. It was a
It
few
was the
months
worst of
post.
times.
Yeah, it was the pandemic. It was post George Floyd. It was just a very wild ride. And my deal in particular was a little emotionally interesting because I got a deal from an editor who had passed on the book in March of 2019 and then came back in 2020 and made an offer. And so I had a very long conversation with my agent at that time because it was hard to ignore what was going on in the world. You know, like America was, it was racial tension
Yeah.
everywhere. And I had not even like changed a comma in that book. And
So why do
so,
you want me now?
right, exactly. Like what, I mean, we know what's changed in 18 months, but it's not been my manuscript and it's the exact same story as before. And so I remember having a very long conversation with her about, because I had already written what my second book at that point, and I was like, should we just shop this and see? You know, it was a weird way to get a book
Yeah,
deal.
no, I
I
completely
don't know.
understand.
Yeah, I don't know anyone who has had that happen. And my agent at the time had said, look, most people would not come back. She's like, I've never heard of anyone coming back after they've passed, like in case they had some sort of internal something going on, either with that person individually or at the company. They would probably just say, okay, when the next thing comes in, we'll treat it differently. But to actually go back to someone was unheard of. And so that is how I got my first book deal.
You did
Uh,
decide to take it.
I ended up taking it, and it was like such an interesting conversation because I was like, it's a foot in the door and this is my 9-year-old girl's dream come true to do this. And so I said, if this is the way I've gotten it, as long as I get to tell the story I want to tell, and it's not, you know, it's not going to be whitewashed in any way. It is the story that I wanted to tell. And if the world is ready to receive it now, let's see how that goes. And it went well.
Good for
Which
you
was
though. That's a I can't imagine the things you wrestled with there, thinking
yeah.
like, I don't want to just tick a box for you.
Right, right. Yeah, there was a lot of, it was a 2-hour conversation with my agent. Like, because normally an author, like a debut author, it's an exciting call, right? It's, oh my God, you're getting a book deal. Like, you got an offer. This is great. For me, I was like, wait a minute.
And you're paying a little more attention than maybe some other people would be, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's
And
based on
so
your lived experience too, right?
yeah, for sure. And so then for A Good Indian Girl in the book that's coming out next, I switched publishers and I'm under the Harper Collins umbrella now. And so that one was also interesting because I was not on a contract at that point. And as you know, A Good Indian Girl has that publishing storyline in there. And so I remember when I sent it to my agent initially, it said, you know, it's an interesting thing that we as writers do where you're sort of biting the hand that you need to feed you. And so I didn't know if I was going to be allowed to tell that storyline, or at that
But
point,
it's very
Yellowface had,
real.
yeah, at that point, Yellowface had not come out yet. And so
Oh,
I
okay.
didn't know about it. I really thank R.F. Kuang because Yellowface, I think, opened the door to more of these types of stories. And I obviously got published in the year after. But I remember at the time thinking he might come back to me and say, hey, this is all true, but these are the people we need to pay you. So like, we can't say that. But fortunately, I've had great support along the way. And when I got my deal for A Good Indian Girl, my editor, the Canadian editor in particular, had said, let's make this as good as we can. We're not going to shy away from this, which is great news.
Two different covers.
Two different
One
covers. Yep.
American, one Canadian, I'm guessing. Why
Yep.
did you decide on which ones that go where?
I did not decide, and you're going to see two different covers come out again. um, and so,
Is it just
the
based on
team,
what sells better in each country?
yeah. So, people who are not me,
Higher pay
do
grades.
their, yeah, do their market research. And it's very interesting what they come back with. You're going to see two wildly different covers for the next one. Again, like wildly different. And yeah, I think, the way that I see it, which is not what they said to me. This is totally me paraphrasing, is the Canadian market can handle covers that look a little more upmarket and more literary, and the American market, it has to be more commercial. So
I'm
that
gonna take that as a compliment as a
I'm
Canadian.
yeah, I still have my Canadian citizenship. I'm taking that as a compliment too.
But in a
So
world where, like I think of a world of book talk and Instagram
yeah,
and all of those things, a lot of in some cases, you want the catchy cover, so you get
yeah,
the eyeballs. So I completely understand that the market's a little different in the States with the
yeah.
way the influencers are working. Have you found that the influencers have affected you, or the internets and the social medias, has that affected you at all?
Yeah, it's been, well, it's what's funny. So I like it is a personal preference. I like both covers and I understand they're doing different things, but like if I were picking up a book that I did not write, like I gravitate more toward like the Canadian type of cover because I like a more literary type of book in general. But it's been interesting because some of the book talk and bookstagrammers from Canada have wanted the American version, and then the Americans have wanted the Canadian version. And so I'm thinking, did we get it wrong? Like, should we have flipped
Hey,
them?
they all read it, so who cares?
Yeah, exactly. Um, so, so yeah, so it's been interesting. I'm gonna be very interested to see what happens with this next one, because for this next one, like, and again, it's personal preferences. There's nothing wrong with any particular cover. Like, there are people, I'm not a marketing person at all. So they do what they do, but I love the Canadian one for the next one. Like, I love it. I understand the business reason behind the American one, but I love the Canadian.
What advice would you have for a young Asian girl who has a story inside her but has no idea how to even broach the world of writing a story at this point?
I would say take classes. That helped me a ton. And in our post-pandemic world, we have so much remote learning available to us. Like when I was taking classes, I was going in person after work to UCLA and, you know, taking writing classes in the evening. But we have so many good resources now that I think if you have that passion, take classes, basically don't do what I did. Don't take 10 years to get something, you know, that can be published. Like there are so many resources out there. And just read very, very widely. I think that is such a key thing. Just read widely, write, but to the extent that you have the resources and you have the means, and there's so many, like I just got an email today of someone who's giving away a scholarship for an underprivileged group. You know, like there's so many resources out there now. And I always tell people, like, if I can help in any way, like reach out to me. Authors are surprisingly approachable.
So
um,
approachable and so
yeah.
patient too when the technology doesn't work.
Yeah, no, I think we're so excited that somebody read our books. Like it's very much because I grew up around Hollywood talent. Like, I mean, not grew up, but like my adult life
Career-wise, yep.
has been around Hollywood talent. And it's really surprising how different that is. Like I feel like as writers, we're just so excited that someone knows we exist. Like, like just approach that. I was always too afraid to approach authors until I became one. And now I realize it's like, oh wow, most of them would actually respond to you and probably within a day.
Do you have any ego in your writing compared to that Hollywood life?
No, not really. Like I feel like the Hollywood life paid my bills and I'm super grateful to it. But I just feel like it was never, you know, there's just certain personality things. Like having been around Hollywood, I will say I don't ever want to be recognizable famous ever. Like I don't ever want, like I live in a neighborhood that had a lot of, you know, celebrities and stuff. I don't ever want to be someone that like at the grocery store, like,
Oh
you
my
know,
God, it just occurred to me. Is your house okay?
my house is okay. It's covered in ash. But I evacuated 6 days after the fires when it got very, very close. It was very close. My home is okay. It's just covered in ash and the water was contaminated. So I got out of there. But yes, it's yeah, it's been a crazy time in LA. Um,
Kidding.
so so yeah, but yeah, I definitely just I want to write and just be, you know, like do book clubs and things like that, but just I like a quiet private life.
That's fair. That is very fair. Okay. Before I wrap this up and let you go, what is the best book you've read lately that you think people should read?
Okay, I'm gonna consult my story graph because my memory is so bad. Oh, I recently read The Society of Lies. Um, and that was so smartly done. I'm not even a thriller reader, but the way that she wove in like racial issues and stuff seamlessly, very seamlessly, into a story like that, I thought that was just so well done. I reached out to her, which again, I'm like, she's a bigger author than me. This is, you know, I reached out to her and she actually responded, as they do. So
Yeah.
yeah, I definitely, I think Society of Lies is like a masterclass in like just seamless flow.
Well, thank you so much for your patience tonight,
Of
for the
course.
story. It was so good, and for inspiring the Indian food we had for a few nights afterwards,
Fantastic.
because I am who I am, and oh, it was good.
Good.
And we look forward to the next one. What's the title for those of us watching for it?
We have not announced it yet, but I will tell you here because it's coming soon. It's called Saving Face.
Okay. I think it was on a list that the publisher sent me, so I may
Okay.
have done that, but I have
Yes.
the brain of a squirrel on
It's
this Wednesday
it's
night.
not a well-kept secret. It's on Amazon already. That just doesn't have
Okay.
pictures. So, um, but yes, it is not.
And it comes
This
out when?
is it comes out August 12th.
Oh, so a little summer read.
Yes.
Okay. Well, Mansi, thank you so much for this.
Yes.
All the best in the next launch, and we'll stay in touch.
Sounds perfect. Thank you so much.
Take care. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye bye.